With a creak, not unlike an overtaxed hinge, the heavy maroon stage curtain at Flaxborough's genteel market hall parted precisely 6 minutes ahead of schedule, if Mrs. Tilby's wristwatch was to be trusted. 40 pairs of eyes blinked toward the centre of the stage, expecting the mayor's annual charity speech. Instead, exposed by premature velvet drama, stood Miss Ada Crisp, secretary to the Floral Committee, clutching a large brown account ledger in naked panic. The ledger slipped from her fingers and thudded to the boards. Coins rattled inside. Beside her, Mrs. Bracken's flower arrangement drooped alarmingly, as though embarrassed by association. Someone had pulled the lever. Someone had forced public reckoning. The hall was silent for 2 heartbeats, then erupted in coughs, whispers, and sandal scrapes. Ada, pallid, made no move to pick up the book. The mayor, his own speech clipped mid-sentence, coughed with the authority of a man who has mislaid not only his words, but perhaps also the afternoon's lunch. Gossip fluttered like bunting along the stalls, not the way Miss Crisp normally handles money. "She's precise as the vicar's wife's cutlery," muttered Mrs. Bainbridge at the sweet table. "Well, it'll be something to do with those flower show invoices, you mark me," offered Mr. Jesson, whose critical faculties extended no further than his allotment. "My Stanley said he saw the mayor at the bank last Friday." "Odd, wasn't it?" croaked Mrs. Purton, never one to miss a hatched, matched, or dispatched. Nerves, I expect. Or indigestion. "Market Hall's pies aren't what they were," sighed the verger, already considering the angle from which he might offer spiritual consolation. At the back, Miss Bracken declared, "The only scandal here is that dahlia. Looks like it's been in a fight." Through the confusion, Inspector Purbright entered almost invisibly, the sort of man who made entrances seem accidental. He paused near the upended ledger. Eyes roved, never resting on any face longer than politeness required. His gaze lingered a fraction longer on a small, torn scrap price tag caught beneath Mrs. Bracken's battered dahlia. The tag read, cryptically, 3D less. It clung with such clear inappropriateness that no one else seemed to see it. Purbright bent, restored the ledger to Ada Crisp's trembling hands, and said gently, "A little less time in the dark than usual, Miss Crisp. Not always kind to flowers or accounts." Ada stared at him as if the phrase held judgment. Purbright smiled a small, weather-sensitive thing, then addressed the mayor about the arrangement of coins in the ledger, as if this might have significance in the growth of tuberous perennials. Before anyone could muster a reply, the market hall clock chimed, not 12 as expected, but a single, echoing note, off-tempo and off-calendar. Half the crowd looked up, imagining perhaps that the timepiece had developed a conscience. The mayor frowned, Ada whimpered, and Mrs. Bracken dabbed her eyes. A junior clerk scurried in. "Sir, someone swapped out the winner's rosette on the dahlia table. It says, 'For services rendered.'" Inspector Purbright looked at the ledger, the tag, the limp flowers, and the silent mayor. His expression, as ever, was a question no one quite understood. Inspector Purbright gazed thoughtfully at the council chamber's leaded windows, where errant sunbeams dappled the rows of framed photographs, mayors stern and florid through the decades, some looking as if the very seat beneath them suffered a mild toothache. The market hall scandal, with its premature curtain and exposed ledger, hovered over Flaxborough like an inconvenience determined to become a curse. The townsfolk's nerves, strummed at noon, reverberated across the cobbled streets and shaded alleys, meddling with the routines as insidiously as Mrs. Bracken's cologne is a scent everyone could name, but only half enjoyed. By 3 o'clock, half of Flaxborough had reinvented versions of the curtain incident, some with ghostly accomplices, some with absconding bookkeepers. The mayor, typically afflicted only by his shoes, was observed pacing outside the town library, conferring with Ada Crisp through a veil of hand gestures and threatened exclamations. Meanwhile, Mrs. Bracken had commandeered the south-facing window of the Scarborough Arms to nurse both tea and outrage, her presence a magnet for sympathy and speculation. Inspector Purbright, serene in his brown raincoat despite the dry afternoon, entered Crossley's general store. This was his preferred opening, where the local intellects gathered over biscuits that tasted of dust and faint resentment. The bell's tinkle, more apology than announcement, drew Mr. Crossley's attention from his tin of combs. "Ah, Inspector, I thought you police preferred departments for this sort of, what is it, hullabaloo?" Mr. Crossley's hands fluttered over the tin as if shielding his stock from accusations. "Departments do have their place," Purbright replied gently, "but so do conversations, particularly when the topic is frightened ledgers." Crossley adjusted his spectacles and spoke low. "Well, Miss Crisp's never been one for drama, a bit of fuss over double entry maybe, but her prizes always add up." He hesitated, as if weighing whether a customer deserved a discount on a juicy scandal. "Has there been any talk," Purbright inquired, "of disagreements within the floral committee?" "Resentments, perhaps, over the arrangement of arrangements?" Crossley considered. "You'd do better asking Mrs. Bracken. She's likely sent more committee members to tears than the onions in aisle 4. But she's not one for pinching pennies, if you take my meaning. Overzealous, yes. Crooked, no." A pause, heavy with the store's scent of starch and secrets. Purbright surveyed the counter and remarked, "Odd, don't you think that a price tag should travel from your store to a flower arrangement, especially one labelled 3D less?" Crossley blinked, a weathered man witnessing spring snow. "If there's been any shortchanging, Inspector, it's the customer, not the shop. Thank you." "If you recall anything," said Purbright, "particularly about late-night visits or unsettled bills, let me know." Stepping outside, Purbright found Sergeant Love awaiting him, posing prim as a hedge in June. "Committee's in an uproar, sir," reported Love. "Ada Crisp is refusing interviews except with the mayor. Mrs. Bracken says the ledger's a sideshow. She's more concerned about the roses. Meanwhile, someone swapped the winner's rosette, and they've not found a soul willing to admit it." "What about the Market Hall staff?" Purbright asked. Love produced a notebook, its cover curled at the edges. "The caretaker says he left the curtain controls untouched, claims the ropes tangled themselves, if the theory of independent-minded cordage applies. The pianist says he saw 2 figures on stage right before the incident, but he was too busy with 'Abide with Me' to get a good look." "Nothing on the clock?" Purbright probed. "Oh, just the usual discrepancies. Keeps poor time and worse secrets. Serviced 6 months ago by Mr. Frost, from Lim. Liked by all except for those he charges." A cloud rolled briefly across Purbright's face. He turned back toward the Scarborough Arms, where Mrs. Bracken presided over her court. They entered as a humming silence rose, that hush reserved for out-of-place constables and the rare appearance of garlic bread. In the afternoon, Mrs. Bracken began, selecting a chair that didn't wobble dangerously. "May I ask you about your followers and your committee?" Mrs. Bracken sniffed. "Inspector, every year the committee gets smaller. Folk drift off, some to other shows, some because they've lost interest. Truth is, Ada's the only one who could run the books. She's more meticulous than the rector counting parishioners." "Any reason for discord lately?" Her eyebrow performed a rare arch. "Discord's part of the job, isn't it? Last week someone objected to my using delphiniums with dahlias and said it looked improper. I told them nobody objects to cheese with plums." She sipped, then leaned in. "There's more, though. The Garden Society wants to absorb us. They say it's for efficiency, but it's always about money. Ada's been fighting that." "Garden Society?" Purbright repeated. "Would you happen to know if any member might wish the committee ill?" She nodded, lips pursed. "Mr. Liddle from Finch Close, always poking about. asking for copies of the accounts, always stressing transparency like he's the only glass in town. Sergeant Love jotted notes furiously, the very model of sincere diligence. Purbright glanced about, noting Miss Crisp's furtive arrival. She passed not into the bar, but into a side parlour, clutching the ledger so close it seemed stitched to her blouse. The inspector followed. Ada, seated by a chipped tea tray, regarded him with watery fierceness. "I never meant for this, Inspector." "For what?" She pressed the ledger forward a few inches. "I found inconsistencies this morning, small ones. Pennies missing, then coins put back. Prize entries swapped. I tried to fix it before the event. Who else knows?" Ada's lips trembled. "No one, except perhaps Mrs. Bracken, though she cares more for the blooms than the numbers. And the ledger? Have you any suspicion as to how it came to be out there on the stage?" Ada shook her head. "I locked it in the storeroom overnight." "Mr. Liddell demanded it yesterday and then again this morning. I refused. At lunchtime, I noticed the lock had a new scratch. Did you report it?" "Number. I thought I was imagining things. I often do since my father passed, I'm afraid. But the tag under Mrs. I remember seeing that price at Crossley's right before closing yesterday." "I see," said Purbright gently. "Thank you, Miss Crisp, for your candour and care." As Purbright left the parlour, Sergeant Love intercepted him. "Sir, I've spoken with Mr. Liddell. He claims he's only interested in proper accounting, but he was seen near the market hall twice this morning, once by Mr. Jesson while delivering onions, and a second time by the cleaner, who said Liddell asked about the stage layout. Both say he looked agitated." Purbright inclined his head. "We shall consider agitation, Sergeant, as both motive and confounder." Outside, the market hall clock chimed the correct number this time, but the sound was curiously muffled, as if in apology. As dusk edged in over Flaxborough's lanes, the scandal's momentum showed no sign of slowing. From church pews to chip shops, talk of price tags and ledgers, curtains and committee feuds radiated outward. An elderly man passing Purbright in the twilight remarked, "Never seen such fuss about a ledger. When I ran the railway accounts, missing shillings meant extra biscuits at the audit." A woman sweeping steps muttered, "If you ask me, someone swapped more than flowers." It's a swap all round. For the first time, Purbright allowed himself an almost imperceptible smile. Within the market hall, a shadow lingered, a person examining the stage. A faint glimmer of torn paper lay near the curtain lever. Purbright, concealed behind a pillar, noted the movement, marking the shape. Tomorrow would bring more questions, perhaps even answers. But for now, in the public hush of evening, Flaxborough plotted, whispered, and waited. Morning broke sullenly, a haze trailing over Flaxborough High Street, lending the window panes a taciturn gleam, and making the market hall resemble a patient expecting bad news. The curtain incident, now a full-fledged scandal, began to multiply details with each retelling. No longer was it merely a premature reveal of Ada Crisp's fragile composure, was becoming the pivot about which all minor grievances could be spun. In the Scarborough Arms, the latest version involved last year's vegetable show treasurer and a missing tin of toffees, although nobody recalled actual sweets being purchased. Outside Crossley's, two pensioners debated the moral lessons of unfettered velvet as if they'd written treatises on ecclesiastical upholstery. Elsewhere, Mrs. Bracken was already standing guard over the dahlia table with her floral umbrella truncheon at the ready. Purbright's method that morning was as unhurried as the market hall's clock, which had reverted to chiming twice for every hour. A gentle pressure brought him to the public library, where Miss Weltham, librarian of frost and starched collars, managed a kingdom of order. He requested the committee records for the last 3 flower shows, and she obligingly slid a slate-blue folder across the desk with barely a twitch. "Nothing ever gets lost in here, Inspector," she announced almost pointedly. He turned pages, scanning entries for prize monies and supply purchases. Amid paragraphs of horticultural grandeur, one pattern stuck out each year. A small but increasing portion of the prize allocations was marked miscellaneous, with only a vague C ledger as explanation. It was precisely the category most susceptible to error or design. There, too, the name of Mr. Liddell began to intrude with regular frequency, his signature appearing twice as an observer in the margins. Purbright closed the folder and returned it with tacit thanks. Miss Weltham observed, "If it's trouble about Ada Crisp, I shouldn't put much faith in whispers. She does more voluntary sums than most do paid ones." Stepping outside, Purbright found Sergeant Love waiting, notebook as always at the ready. "Sir, I've compiled the interviews. 3 more say Mr. Liddell was around Market Hall between 8 and 9. Making notes, according to Mrs. Partridge, and looking very jumpy by the dahlia table, per Mr. Yates, who claims he saw Liddell's shoes tracking pollen." "Anything else about the curtain lever?" Purbright asked. "The caretaker swears up and down he checks it every morning. The only time it's moved is for rehearsals, except for yesterday's premature unveiling. Claims the rope's been frayed for months, but nobody will spend for a new one. And the ledger, account entries for last week, show a 10-shilling withdrawal under garden sundries. But Mrs. Bracken says nothing was bought unless biscuit fuel counts. At the Market Hall, preparations for the evening's council gathering were already underway. Mrs. Bracken patrolled the perimeter, umbrella locked over her arm. Mr. Liddell, meanwhile, had appointed himself intermediary between the committee and the Garden Society, a role he filled with the cheerless energy of someone who believes all problems respond to correct spelling. Purbright approached him at the benches outside the library, where Liddell was immersed in a sheaf of bank statements. "Mr. Liddell," Purbright said, nodding politely, "may I trouble you about yesterday's events?" Liddell glanced up, forehead pursed in the manner of someone suspecting an audit. "I have no objection to transparency, Inspector. I requested the ledger only for the sake of order. Ada's fright was unfortunate. Yet you were seen at Market Hall both early and late. Interested in dahlia arrangements, perhaps?" Impossible not to be. He folded a statement. "Garden Society is under strict scrutiny. If funds wander, so do reputations." Purbright nodded. "Committee funds seem to have wandered through miscellaneous expenses for 3 years running." Liddell bristled. "Is that Ada's doing? Her signatures are meticulous, but so are yours in the margin." Liddell coughed. "Committee rules observer initials only. I haven't counted coins, just the attendance." After a respectful pause, Purbright asked, "Did you see anyone near the curtain lever before the incident?" "Plenty. The pianist, a girl shifting bouquets, and, oddly enough, Miss Weltham herself, though she seemed concerned about loose pages." "Loose pages?" Love interjected, eager for substance. "She mentioned some flower show rosters in need of binding. She's particular about paper." Purbright thanked Liddell, whose calm now had the brittle quality of glass, transparent but liable to crack. Later, in the council's ante-room, Purbright and Love found Ada Crisp with Mayor Tottle, both pale as ghostly root vegetables. Tottle was preoccupied with his collar, Ada with the ledger's clasp. "We're just reviewing last year's accounts," Inspector Tottle said. Ada muttered, "Sir, I should speak privately." The mayor collected his jacket and departed with the reluctant dignity of a man asked to vacate his own photograph. Ada whispered, "Mr. Liddell's made me nervous for months. He asks after the tiniest details. I've checked some expenses that made sense at the time, but I can't recall what 2 shilling notes went to last spring." Purbright listened. "Have you reason to suspect anyone helped themselves?" Ada hesitated, rubbing the ledger's spine. "Not exactly, just odd little substitutions. One flower show runner gets a larger prize than listed. Then, unexpectedly, A rosette swapped, and the dahlia table was marked, "For services rendered." I saw Mrs. Bracken wince when she heard that. A pause, broken only by the squeak of a trolley in the hallway. Purbright stood. "Thank you, Miss Crisp. The committee's accounting, physical and social, might benefit from an outside perspective. We must not let numbers determine reputations. Will you speak at the council's gathering tonight?" she asked, eyes pleading for a reprieve. "I'll observe. Public events seem to offer more revelations in Flaxborough than private interviews." Outside, Love noted, "Sir, I've asked Crossleys for sales records matching that price tag." Only 3 arrangements were tagged 3D less. 2 were bought by Mrs. Bracken and 1 by the caretaker, who claims he used it for experimenting with discounts. The evening's council meeting promised public drama. The townsfolk amassed under the market hall's bowed ceiling, their faces arranged in competing expressions of pique. Ada Crisp, ledger on her lap, was bookended by Mrs. Bracken in a hat best described as terrific, and Mr. Liddle, pen at the ready. The mayor called for order. "Ladies and gentlemen, before proceeding with town business, I must address yesterday's regrettable incident." Gossip bubbled instantly. From the back, probably another swap. Maybe the clock too. Someone else, I heard. Ada kept the ledger in her bootless theft there. Purbright stood unnoticed, eyes making a quiet tally of faces. The council called Ada Crisp to speak. She walked trembling to the front, ledger held high, and cleared her throat. "My records have shown discrepancies, small ones. I can't say who is to blame, but I hope the committee can resolve this by reviewing all entries." A murmur of agreement. But as Ada handed the ledger to the mayor, a slip of paper protruded, a scrap torn from a larger sheet. On its edge, a penciled sum of 7 shillings for delivery. Mrs. Bracken gasped, Mr. Liddle stiffened, and Purbright's gaze fixed on the mayor's hand. Before Purbright could speak, the market hall clock chimed in protest, first 3, then 1. A shriek rose from behind the council table, chair buckled, and council papers spilled to the floor. All eyes turned, mouths agape. A hush as complete as the grave, save for the shuffle of hastily recovered papers, gripped the market hall. The council's table, now askew from the collapsed chair, exuded a wounded dignity, while the mayor, cheeks florid as forced rhubarb, rescued his spectacles from the rosette-strewn floor. Sergeant Love sprang forward, his impulse more heroic than graceful, and rights were restored to the errant chair, a relic whose rickety shame was now inseparable from the evening's business. Yet it was not the broken furniture that held the room. All eyes, emboldened and full of questions, returned to the slip of paper jutting from Ada Crisp's ledger, its penciled 7s. For delivery, the latest spur to speculation. Suspicion trailed in its wake, attaching itself freely and with great speed to every suspect in the room. Mrs. Bracken, never one to squander such a dramatic opportunity, leaned across the table and announced, with the full authority of a woman who had once organized her roses alphabetically, "That is not my handwriting, nor, I might add, do I use deliverymen. My own arms see to my petunias." Mr. Liddle, momentarily colourless, muttered about irregular procurement and made a performative inspection of the ledger under the mayor's nose. Ada sat still, hands folded, as if her knuckles prayed. From the upper rows came a whispered assessment. "Likely the cleaner's bill, she's always poking about after hours." Another, "If you ask me, it's coded, all those pennies pay off for keeping silent, I'd say." Inspector Purbright stayed thoughtfully at the periphery, inviting confidences without courting them. Eyes slipped to him, then away, measuring his stillness the way farmers appraise an unfamiliar dog amongst their hens. When proceedings resumed, the business of allotment fencing and dog licenses passed in a subdued drone. It was as if the entire council were waiting for some greater show to begin. During a lull, Purbright signalled subtly to Sergeant Love. The pair excused themselves under the pretext of examining the failed chair task that brought them neatly behind the curtain, close to the shadowy realms of levers and rope. "Notice anything odd, Sergeant?" Purbright's whisper barely disturbed the velvet. Love, squinting in the semi-dark, frowned. "This rope, sir, has a new splice just here. Knotted oddly, not the caretaker's usual, nor Crossley's handiwork, I suspect. But someone prepared no fraying now, perhaps a hasty repair to hide a second tampering? Possible, sir. Dust's been disturbed here. Footprints. And see that?" Love pointed to a white smudge on the lever. "Flour," Purbright mused, testing the smudge on his fingertips. "Not paint, not chalk. Market halls, kitchen stores flour on Tuesdays, but there was no baking planned last night. A visitor with other business, perhaps." Back beyond the curtain, the public session wound through its usual byways. Yet as chairs scraped and dignitaries prepared for departure, Mr. Crossley entered through the side doors, cheeks stippled with concern. He approached Purbright after an exchange of nervous glances at Mrs. Bracken and Mr. Liddle. "Inspector, I didn't know if, well, perhaps it's nothing, but my shop's cash box tally is off. Only by 2 shillings. I'd have thought it a miscount, but this morning I found a receipt for precisely that amount, addressed to the committee in Ada's handwriting, but I never saw her. Only the caretaker collected it. Paid in 3-penny bits and odd sixpences like from the bottom of a purse. Unusual, that." Purbright thanked him, releasing Crossley back to his inventory of worries. Midway down the aisle, Ada Crisp herself intercepted the inspector, as if drawn by a magnetic sense for trouble and its guardians. "I never sent that money, Inspector. I tallied the cash. It went missing from the prize envelope. I thought perhaps I'd misplaced it, but I never issued any receipt." "If the committee paid Crossley, it was not with my knowledge." "Who else handles committee money?" Purbright asked, with a voice of all warmth and suggestion. "Only myself and Mr. Liddle. But he's never trusted with coins, only tallies. The caretaker sometimes collects parcels, but not payments." They were joined by Mrs. Bracken, undeterred by conspiracy of any sort. "Inspector, I recognize that handwriting as Ada's, though it's not her, if you understand me. She writes neatly under stress. This is an ink tremble. Whoever wrote this was copying her hand badly. See the loop on the D?" "A fair observation," Purbright nodded, catching the slight narrowing of eyes in a shadowed corner. "Forgery or an attempt?" "If you want my opinion," Mrs. Bracken continued, lowering her voice, "Liddle's clever but lacks imagination. The cleaner, though she's always in the back rooms, is never short of flour." Left alone, Purbright turned the day's events over in his mind. A forged receipt, a spliced rope, flour where it did not belong, and a prize tag from Crossley's, each small on its own, but together forming a pattern only slightly more convoluted than a town council's meeting minutes. Gossip, meanwhile, boiled on in the streets. Mrs. Purton, ensconced at her window, declared to a passing grocer, "Not one of them can be trusted." I saw Liddle counting change at the newsagent's. Guilt does that, makes a man careful with pennies. Her neighbour, Mr. Jesson, countered, guilty, or just not wanting short change from Ada Crisp. Might be she's owed as much sympathy as suspicion. That evening, beneath a sky the colour of old pewter, Sergeant Love called Purbright's attention to a new twist. "Sir, the cleaner has been missing her regular hours. Wasn't seen by Mr. Crossley and failed to collect her pay. Leaving the back door of the market hall unlatched is unusual, as she always locks up. The only thing found was her duster on the bench and a faint mark of flour by the kitchen. Any trace of her at home? None, sir. Her lodger says she returned late and left again near midnight, said she had to make things tidy, locked the door behind her, and vanished." For the first time, Purbright's customary composure grew taut. though only for a moment. Best check that evening, beneath a sky the colour of old pewter, Sergeant Love called Purbright's attention to a new twist. "Sir, the cleaner has been missing her regular hours, wasn't seen by Mr. Crossley, and failed to collect her pay. Leaving the back door of the market hall unlatched is unusual, as she always locks up. The only thing found was her duster on the bench and a faint mark of flour by the kitchen. Any trace of her at home?" "None, sir. Her lodger says she returned late and left again near midnight. Said she had to make things tidy, locked the door behind her, and vanished." For the first time, Purbright's customary composure grew taut, though only for a moment. "Best check the riverbank and have a word at the station. Someone in this tidy town is running out of places to hide a mess, Sergeant." As night closed over Flaxborough, 2 constables walked the perimeter of the market hall, lantern beams gliding over stones. The town itself, despite secrets newly aired and others hinted at, settled into the stubborn calm of English small hours, where only the insomniac and the guilty roam. But behind drawn curtains and locked market doors, the scandal's roots only twisted deeper. Night waned, and Flaxborough greeted the day with a mixture of caution and curiosity. News of the missing cleaner galloped through breakfast tables and swept along the high street in gusts of speculation, some earnest, others gleeful. The market hall, already shadowed by controversy, now seemed almost besieged by guilt and suspicion, every doorstep whisper pondering how a woman paid to make things tidy could so thoroughly disrupt the town's composure. It was as if every broom and duster now bore witness. "Have a word at the station. Someone in this tidy town is running out of places to hide a mess, Sergeant." As night closed over Flaxborough, 2 constables walked the perimeter of the market hall, lantern beams gliding over stones. The town itself, despite secrets newly aired and others hinted at, settled into the stubborn calm of English small hours, where only the insomniac and the guilty roam. But behind drawn curtains and locked market doors, the scandal's roots only twisted deeper. Night waned, and Flaxborough greeted the day with a mixture of caution and curiosity. News of the missing cleaner galloped through breakfast tables and swept along the high street in gusts of speculation, some earnest, others gleeful. The market hall, already shadowed by controversy, now seemed almost besieged by guilt and suspicion, every doorstep whisper pondering how a woman paid to make things tidy could so thoroughly disrupt the town's composure. It was as if every broom and duster now bore witness. Inspector Purbright arrived before sunrise, the first trace of pink on his coat collar. He paused beside the riverbank, where Sergeant Love, torch in hand, was already examining scraps caught in the reeds, mostly paper, and a disintegrating peppermint wrapper, but among them a torn corner from a council minutes sheet and a smudge, distinctly pale, that bore the unmistakable mark of fluorescence and was clearly above the tide mark. "Found nothing substantial, sir," Love reported, "but the cleaner's duster is missing and someone's been about last night. Footprints in the kitchen garden, heavy and narrow, plodding like a man in borrowed boots." "Borrowed, you think?" Purbright asked quietly, stooping to study the smudge. "Cleaner's nephew, perhaps. He borrows shoes too big. He likes looking taller, he says. Works in the butcher's." Purbright made note. Young men, he reflected, sometimes found themselves involved in unlikely messes in Flaxborough, drawn by impulse or invitation. By 8 o'clock the town was a hive of intrigue. Mrs. Bainbridge confided to anyone within earshot that the missing duster was less unusual than Mrs. Bracken's new hat, all feathers and righteous indignation. Mr. Jesson, tending his tomatoes with theatrical solemnity, told Purbright that market gossip now traced every coin spent in the past fortnight back to Ada Crisp, Lidl, or, improbably, the Flower Committee's cat. Inside Market Hall, Purbright joined Sergeant Love, for a word with the caretaker, who, having arrived even earlier than Purbright, had spent the morning inspecting locks with the suspicion of a man who believes doors tamper themselves overnight. "I locked up as always," insisted the caretaker, tapping his keyring with conviction. "But the cleaner usually pops in at daybreak." "Not today." "She's as regular as the clock, sir, and less prone to inexplicable silence." Purbright surveyed the storeroom, where traces of flour still lingered near the door, along with a scuffed mark from a rubber heel. "Did she ever remark on missing money?" The caretaker shook his head, face pale. "She kept to herself, Inspector. I liked her routines. Told me once every town had a smell here, she said. It's dust, coins, and envy. Love jotted, riverbank, duster missing, nephew's boots." Purbright asked, "Did you see anyone else last night or early this morning?" "Mr. Liddell was here late after the council meeting, poking at the accounts table, and said he'd lost a fountain pen. And Ada, crisp she, couldn't find her purse. Distressed she was." In the hall, the signs of last night's council drama now mingled with fresh arrivals, drawn by curiosity and the possibility of a breakthrough. Mr. Crossley, less haggard than before, informed Purbright that the cash shortfall had miraculously resolved itself. 2 shillings tucked under the biscuit tin. No note, but a whiff of lavender and flour, like someone tidying up before departing. Ada Crisp approached in the committee office, stared at the inspector with haunted eyes and a touch of defiance. "It's becoming ruinous, Inspector. I've recounted every prize, and the numbers alter themselves when you turn away. Last night I locked the ledger in the filing cabinet, left, and returned just before dawn." "I'm certain someone's copying entries as I sleep. Entry logs show the cleaner in the hall at midnight," Love observed, producing the faded sign-in sheet. Ada nodded. She always worked late for pre-show events and said mornings were too full of watchers. But she rarely approached the ledger with too many rumours about coin curses. "Yet I found this." She handed Purbright a folded piece of receipt paper, inked with the phrase "paid, 3D less." A debt gone dull. He examined the script deliberately, shakily, unlike Ada's neat accounting. Fresh flour dust flecked the fold. The inquiry moved through Market Hall, blending observation with gentle confrontation. Mrs. Bracken gave a performance worthy of an overbearing aunt, indignation embroidered into every syllable. "Inspector, if you're asking, my only crime is loving my petunias more than my committee peers. If someone's swapped my blooms or my prize, it's out of jealousy." "And late-night visits?" Purbright prompted. She deflected with a theatrical huff. "I dream of dahlias, Inspector, not of ledgers, nor missing cash. You should question the cleaner's nephew. The odd boy never liked my roses." Taking the cue, Purbright sent Love to the butcher's shop. There the nephew, Tommy Havers, denied any involvement, but his boots, dusted with flour and still damp, belied words with evidence. Love, unpractised but earnest, recounted the tracks at the riverbank, causing Tommy's voice to jump octaves before fading. "I just went for a walk. Aunt asked me to fetch her from Market Hall when she ran late," Tommy mumbled. "She was nervous about the council, said someone had framed her by swapping tags and barely spoke to me." "Was there anyone else?" Love pressed kindly. "Ada Crisp. She argued with Mr. Liddell about keys. Liddell said he'd fix things himself if Ada wouldn't give him the ledger." "He had flour on his cuffs," Tommy said, voice trembling. Returning, Purbright collected accounts of the cleaner's absence, nephew's flour marks, Ada's nervous entries, and Liddell's late-night prowling, and mapped the nexus of small-town pressure. As noon struck, more voices chimed in. Mr. Jesson's tomatoes had been rearranged. Mrs. Purton saw the cleaner's lodger burning paper last night, and Crossley's assistant found a slip of council minutes, torn and marked for services rendered. Each clue a delicate disturbance, each witness offering more than asked or less than needed. Purbright gathered all and addressed the crowd with his customary gravity. Everyone's arrangements and finances are being altered, sometimes through oversight, sometimes intent. Until the cleaner returns, we must be patient. Too swift a conclusion risks uprooting truths that, like prize petunias, thrive in light but falter in haste. His words, gentle and sly, turned eyes to their own doubts. The mood in Market Hall shifted subtly from urgency to vigil. One by one, suspects and bystanders reconsidered their stories, their secrets. Nobody left without glancing at least once toward the locked storeroom, the flowery marks, or Ada Crisp's haunted ledger. At dusk, Sergeant Love reported a new detail. "Sir, the riverbank gardener saw someone at dawn standing near the reeds holding a bundle, possibly the missing duster, certainly a council file. Too far to see the face, but tall, awkward postures." Purbright nodded. "Tomorrow, Sergeant, we'll seek what remains when the dust settles. Guilt, like flour, clings to those who stir it without care." The chill of dawn stretched long shadows over Flaxborough's Market Hall, pressing yesterday's tensions into a new shape that felt somehow crisp and secretive. The absence of the cleaner and the strange traces by the riverbank had steered suspicion toward anyone with flour on their cuffs. There was a hush in the local shops and on the town green, a sense that Flaxborough had paused. Even the bell outside Crossleys tolled with uncertainty, as if warning against hasty speculation. By 7, council gossip had reached a boiling point. Mrs. Purton, from her window, declared the cleaner likely gone off to start a new life in Basingstoke, while Mr. Jesson, who disapproved of migrations further than the allotments, countered she'd simply fallen behind on her cleaning and would soon resurface dustier but none the wiser. In the Scarborough Arms, Mrs. Bracken entertained a semicircle of sympathizers, explaining how petunias never leave without a trace, unlike some suspicious dusters. Inspector Purbright stood in the Market Hall's kitchen, a white smudge on the worktop, yielding the unmistakable scent of flour. Sergeant Love, anxious but methodical, catalogued every footprint, some deliberate, others muddied by panic. The cleaner's nephew, Tommy, had been sent home, a trail of flour leading from his boots to his aunt's modest cottage. Purbright watched as Love compared sole sizes, lips pursed in polite determination. "No new tracks near the storeroom, sir," Love reported. "Caretaker swears nobody entered after Ada Crisp. The missing duster seems more like an afterthought unless someone's covering their retreat." Ada herself appeared in the doorway, ledger pressed to her chest, as if bracing for impact. "You won't find sense in those numbers, Inspector. Last night I counted the coins 3 times. Still, more went missing and then appeared again, under my blotter, wrapped in scrap paper." Purbright accepted her statement with the same equanimity accorded a forecast of rain. "Sometimes, Miss Crisp, complications are more revealing than clarity. Each vanished coin and each errant note, someone is keeping score, though not by the book." The morning's routine was abruptly interrupted by a scene that would become the second set piece of the scandal. The Garden Society, intent on public reconciliation, hosted a breakfast. Mrs. Bracken presented her petunias with the air of one introducing royalty. Mr. Liddell, for once a touch ruffled, stood at the coffee urn, urging unity with statistics about community engagement. Ada Crisp arrived last, her hands trembling, her gaze darting from the committee's faces to the table of baked goods. Purbright lingered at the margin, blending neither fully into the crowd nor the woodwork. Suddenly, as pastries were passed and the mayor extolled collective harmony, a shrill cry echoed from the kitchen. The caretaker, teapot forgotten, emerged holding what everyone recognized instantly, the cleaner's missing duster, neatly folded and speckled with flour, and more unsettling, a council file tied within its folds. The room turned silent, except for the mayor's tea, splattering down his tie. Mrs. Purton gasped. "She's returned to confess," while Mrs. Bracken squeezed her umbrella in satisfaction. But Purbright's eyes skipped past the spectacle, settling instead on the file's label. Committee minutes, prize allocations. He reached into his pocket, producing the receipt Ada had given him with the phrase, "Paid. 3D less, a debt gone dull." He gently gestured to the caretaker to hand over the bundle. Each eye in the hall glinted, half in dread, half in anticipation. Opening the file, Purbright found the council, minutes from 3 nights prior, pages missing, others replaced by forgeries. A single flower petal dried, blue fell from the fold. It was not from Mrs. Bracken's garden, but, he recalled, from the cleaner's window-sill arrangement admired during an earlier visit. The file's contents had been disturbed, then restored, and prize allocations altered, with additional entries in a shaky hand resembling Ada Crisp's, but not quite matching. Mr. Liddell glowered, his fingers trembling beside his coffee. Who brings forged accounts to breakfast, and why wrap them in a dusting cloth? Purbright did not answer, instead turning to the town's gossipy chorus. "Miss Crisp, did you ever ask the cleaner to handle documents?" Ada replied, voice thin. "Only once. She found my misplaced forms, but she never amended records. She feared being blamed for anything untidy." "Love, the sergeant's notebook ready," whispered. Cleaner's lodger swore she left angry last night after an argument with Tommy. Said he'd meddled with her receipts and hinted the ledger was the root of all rows. Mrs. Bracken interceded. "The cleaner is guiltless, if you ask me. Always sweeps away suspicion, never causes it." The committee breakfast devolved into arguments. The mayor, desperate to restore order, suggested an ad hoc review of last year's prizes, appending public apologies to any parties, petals, or petunias maligned in this unfortunate business. Yet Ada Crisp's pale resolve and Liddell's taut disapproval made clear that apologies would not fix missing money nor restore trust. Purbright summoned Tommy, whose face was damp with confusion. "Did your aunt ever give you coin bags or files to deliver?" Tommy shrugged helplessly. "Twice last week. She said make sure Ada Crisp gets the parcels. But one night after the council meeting, I found a bag in my coat, flour everywhere. I didn't know where it came from, but a note tucked inside said, 'For delivery. Mind the numbers.'" "Did you give it to Ada?" Purbright asked. "Left it in her office?" "She didn't mention it after." Purbright considered the duster and file an attempted clean-up, not only of dust, but also of evidence. The cleaner, perhaps unwitting, had tidied the scandal so neatly it was almost missed. The hall's mood darkened. Committee members eyed each other, some in genuine distress, others with defensive bravado. Mr. Liddell insisted, "Now we see deliberate confusion. Someone is staging chaos to hide theft." Mrs. Bracken retorted, "Nonsense. Some people would filch rain from clouds if they could." Purbright, measured as ever, began piecing the narrative aloud, flour tracked via boots, prize allocations shifted then restored, ledgers amended by anxious, worthy hands. Everyone had touched something, altered something, or suspected someone. But one person, he noted, had consistently tried to fix what others had broken, the cleaner, whose absence now seemed pointedly suspicious. As council breakfast limped toward conclusion, Sergeant Love received a hurried call from the station. The cleaner had been found, dazed, but unharmed at the old coach house. She claimed she'd gone to recover missing council files, found flour everywhere, and panicked when confronted by strange voices at midnight. Thus, the hurried retreat and forgotten pay. Purbright gave the news to the assembled committee. The cleaner would be interviewed. Order, perhaps, would return. Still the scandal swirled, suspicions clustered, and Ada Crisp's haunted ledger weighed heavy with fresh secrets. Flaxborough's midday sun crept between clouds shaped like old council chairs, lending a brightness to the market hall that was almost mischievous. It gleamed across the assembly's bowed heads and flickered on Ada Crisp's fretful spectacles, making the ledger beside her appear more like a burden than a tool. The return of the cleaners, recounted now in at least 4 conflicting versions, was fast becoming the story of the week. By lunchtime, rumours of mistaken identity abounded. Mrs. Purton suspected the coach house was a red herring. Tommy's mother, who preferred not to be named, whispered about a second cleaner with a limp and sticky fingers. Inspector Purbright, treading carefully between gossip and fact, assembled the committee in Market Hall's side room for a quieter round of interviews. The cleaner sat demurely, hands clasped in apologetic resolve, beside a constable with a notebook and an uneaten potato cake. She explained, in a voice both steady and subdued, that she'd entered the hall after hearing voices in the storeroom, discovered flour spilling from a split bag, and taken her distress. Old habits die harder than old rumours to tidy the spill. She admitted wrapping the file and coins in the cloth, but denied forging any notes or being privy to prize swaps. Purbright considered her account, each phrase as careful and tidy as her work. "Did you notice anyone else while there?" he asked, with patient gravity. Ada Crisp was crying in the council office, the cleaner allowed, voice soft. And Mr. Liddle came twice just after sunset, searching for a misplaced pen, and then again as I left, asking after the keys. He seemed angry and said something about a mess left for others to sort out. Sergeant Love, ever earnest, pressed for details. Did he touch the ledger, the files, or anything else? Not in front of me. He did linger near Ada's desk, she replied. He dropped some coins and grumbled about clumsy staff. The story, delivered with no hint of invention, added yet another contour to Flaxborough's growing confusion. Mrs. Bracken arrived next, umbrella swinging, primed for interrogation, but mostly eager to denounce the villainy of prize swaps and insufficient daylight for dahlias. Purbright greeted her with unhurried respect. "Did you handle any committee documents, Mrs. Bracken?" she flared. "Only judged the arrangements and signed the register, Inspector. I trust numbers about as far as I trust last year's roses. I will say that someone's been walking about at night, and if it's not the cleaner or Tommy, it's surely one of the council's own." After the interviews, Purbright walked slowly by the flower stalls, observing small details. The dahlia table was now minus its controversial rosette, but sporting a new sign, "Prizes Reviewed, Committee's Pride." He paused beside Crossley, who worked the till with professional discretion. "We're still off by 6pence, Crossley confided softly. "I'm not convinced it's theft. It could be confusion, Inspector, or just committee chaos. Ada dropped by early and apologized, though she hasn't touched the prize fund since Tuesday." In the town's spirit of polite deflection, Mrs. Bainbridge approached with a theory. Suppose someone isn't stealing at all, just sabotaging the records. Might want the funds reallocated or to make the committee look careless, so the Garden Society gobbles it up. Elsewhere, Tommy Havers, swept up in events beyond his boots, admitted to Love that he'd handled a second file and returned it to Ada's office, out of sight and out of trouble. The file, he said, smelled musty, like flour and lavender, and contained a baffling note. Let light settle debts and shadows take the difference. With every revelation, the web of secrets and small rivalries grew knottier. Flaxborough's streets buzzed at the post office. A clerk speculated about a ghostly figure by the market gates, too tall for the caretaker and not stout enough for Mrs. Bracken. Near the allotments, Mr. Jesson mused that ill luck follows a flower show like weeds after rain. At Market Hall's afternoon committee review, Purbright convened Ada Crisp, Mrs. Bracken, Mr. Liddell, and the cleaner. The mayor joined, eyes darting from ledger to clock. A gentle but firm questioning ensued. Did anyone admit to borrowing keys, leaving files, or amending records? Each denial came quickly, some too quickly. Mrs. Bracken named envy and shoddy bookkeeping as culprits. Mr. Liddell insisted that only precise hands touch funds. As dusk approached, Mrs. Purton relayed a new twist via the grapevine. The local newsagent found traces of flour on prize money envelopes and reported seeing Ada seated in the shop before sunrise, rehearsing lines from the council minutes. Love, gathering whispers, summarized for Purbright. It's spreading, sir. Now, some say Ada's protecting someone, or maybe Mr. Liddell planted evidence to frame the committee and force a merger. Purbright absorbed it all, gaze steady and expression unreadable. In the evening, he called for a brief, unscheduled public gathering in Market Hall, his polite tone masking resolve. The townsfolk arrived in cautious numbers, faces anxious yet eager. In his measured address, the inspector laid out the sequence of events, flower trails, coin confusion, forged notes, and mislaid records without once accusing or absolving. He then posed a gentle but pointed inquiry. When does tidying become rearranging, and when does rearranging become deception? This question lingered as lanterns flickered. Suspects, motives, and loyalties now hovered visibly, old slights echoing in the hush. Flaxborough, for all its tidy hedges and proper ledgers, had become a place where even the smallest act seemed charged with meaning. With evening drawing on, Flaxborough's Market Hall lingered full of expectant hush and barely suppressed irritation. Shadows flickered along the panelled walls, lengthening as street lamps blinked to life outside, and the last committee members shuffled in, their faces marked by a day's worth of low-level accusations. Inspector Purbright, maintaining his customary air of polite detachment, surveyed the scene. Tonight he planned to loosen the knots that the previous day's questioning had only tightened. The cleaner sat quietly beside Ada Crisp and Tommy Havers, her hands folded as if she hoped to mend the whole affair with urgent stillness. Beyond her, Mrs. Bracken had secured herself a vantage seat nearest the ledger, brandishing her umbrella at coin purses and casual explanations alike. Mr. Liddell, uncharacteristically ruffled, cast sidelong glances toward the storeroom door, its lock recently oiled by the caretaker at great committee expense. Sergeant Love, notebook poised, began the first round of inquiries as the committee files were reconstructed from scraps retrieved throughout the day. Ada Crisp detailed her version of coins, files mishandled, and her sleepless nights, pale as the ledger's own pages. The cleaner confirmed that she had gathered the duster and council files in confusion and haste, prompted by anxious whispers overheard at midnight. Tommy acknowledged the delivery of one package, swearing only concern for his aunt and a lasting aversion to dust. And then Mrs. Bracken, irrepressible even at dusk's approach, unfurled her grievance. If this matter turns on petunias or pansies, I expect to see justice done. The committee's trust has been uprooted, and if Mr. Liddell's new procedures make us any less human, I shall resign in a flurry of blooms. Mr. Liddell, voice taut, interrupted her speech to clarify his own late-night movements. He had indeed lost his pen, had twice checked the committee minutes now missing, and had only lingered by Ada's desk in pursuit of accuracy. Crossley arrived midway through, unobtrusive wallet in hand, to state that his till tally was now over rather than under by threepence, so the ledger's arithmetic might well be contagious. Purbright presided from the hearth, listening and watching for the thin seams in the accounts and relationships. He marked Tommy's avoidance of Mrs. Bracken's gaze, Ada's habit of counting each coin twice, and the cleaner's reluctance to meet Mr. Liddle's eyes. He redirected the group to the flow of prize allocations in the minutes, confirming with each member their specific duties leading up to the curtain incident. The cleaner, pressed gently, disclosed that she'd once been asked to change tags on flower tables to avoid confusion and instruction given by Mrs. Bracken, though with little explanation and less thanks. Gossip from the town continued to drizzle in through Sergeant Love's compiled notes. Mrs. Bainbridge claimed she'd seen Ada in Crossley's window after hours, staring intently at a register book. Mr. Jesson swore Tommy had handed over coin bags to Ada in broad daylight, looking guilty as sin. Even the pound cake baker announced, "Someone slipped between two ledgers and gone missing, if you ask me." A second wave of questioning targeted committee allegiances. Purbright asked, "Does anyone in this room have reason to believe that, were the committee dissolved, a new order would benefit financially or socially?" The silence this produced was so expectant that the market hall clock seemed to hesitate before chiming. Mr. Liddle finally spoke in clipped tones. The Garden Society would absorb expenses and responsibilities. No more lost shillings, no more missing tags. Full transparency, Inspector, is my only aim. Mrs. Bracken snorted with derision, umbrella tip-tapping. Transparency breeds suspicion. I prefer muddle. Muddle breeds innovation. Ada Crisp, drawn and weary, admitted worry over changes, fear for routine, and doubt that any adjustment would restore trust without explanation and apology. Purbright summoned Crossley's assistant, who recounted a scene overlooked until now. After the curtain incident, I saw Mr. Liddle returning from the storeroom, wiping flour from his sleeve. He looked worried, and he asked if Ada had ever lost her keys. Love added another note. Caretaker swears only Ada and Liddle held full sets of keys during the committee transition week. The investigation reached its quiet crescendo when Purbright's tone grew slightly firmer. It appears the matter of missing money may not involve theft, but the desperation to appear competent or helpless at the right moment. He let silence settle before continuing. Often in Flaxborough, a well-intended cover-up is more damaging than the truth beneath. Disagreements flickered. Tommy insisted that he had acted only to protect his aunt. Ada refuted copying ledger entries, but her voice fell, fretful. Mrs. Bracken denied instigating chaos beyond floral arrangements. Mr. Liddle continued to advocate for stricter procedures to no audience at all. The evening ended with most present more frustrated than before, yet Purbright, quietly satisfied, sensed the shape of things emerging from the fog of contradiction. As the market hall emptied, the remaining committee members left in clusters, casting wary glances at the ledger, lock, and one another. Outside, Flaxborough settled into its nightly routines, windows shuttered and gossip retreated to kettle and lamplight. Only Purbright lingered beneath the street lamp beside the market hall, savouring the burgeoning clarity he now possessed. Morning arrived in Flaxborough with a brittle energy, the market hall glowing in a feeble sunlight that accentuated the lingering tension. Overnight rain had done little to dampen speculation, nor had it washed away the flower traces still clinging to the threshold. The ledger sat on Ada Crisp's crowded desk, surrounded by wilting invoices and half-eaten biscuits, less an instrument of accounting now, more a fragile talisman. Purbright surveyed the scene as he entered, his expression unreadably placid. News had already percolated. Mrs. Bainbridge reported seeing Mr. Liddle taking a very roundabout route to the stationer's. Mrs. Bracken, feeling slighted by the previous evening's unscheduled gathering, threatened to boycott all further committee meetings unless the dahlia table was restored to its proper dignity. Tommy lingered near the stage, boots cleaned but mood muddy, while the cleaner resumed her duties with studied normality. As preparations began for the Flower Show Awards, a public event to reassert normality, Purbright quietly instructed Sergeant Love to monitor the movements of committee members. With prize envelopes reallocated and chairs double-checked for structural reliability, invitations were posted along the lampposts with florid certainty. The show's opening, Purbright knew, would provide both spectacle and fresh clues. Events in Flaxborough, like roses, always revealed secrets when properly cultivated. The hall soon teemed with townsfolk, Mrs. Purton in her best hat, Mr. Jesson with prideful tomatoes, and Mr. Crossley dispensing harmless gossip alongside peppermint drops. Ada Crisp and Mrs. Bracken exchanged polite nods, studded with warning glances, while Mr. Liddell, notebook in hand, reviewed each envelope as if they might erupt into billowing clouds of flour. The awards ceremony began with typical pageantry, hymns sung an octave off, speeches interrupted by coughs and the scrape of pencil on the account pad. When Mrs. Bracken was called to accept the prize for most vigorous petunias, a ripple of tension darted through the crowd. The mayor read Ada's careful summation. The cleaner hovered, flour dust now cleverly hidden by a new apron. Mrs. Bracken approached the table, only for a hush to descend. The committee's prize envelope sat on a tray, but the label read, not Prize Award, but Outstanding Services Rendered. Murmurs swelled. The phrase, already sullied by a recent scandal, turned every head. She took the envelope and opened it. Inside was a sixpence, a price tag marked 3 pence less, and a single blue petal. "Someone's having a joke at my expense," Mrs. Bracken announced primly. "Or at the committee's. Either way it needs correcting." Mr. Liddell, visibly flushing, stepped forward. "This outrageous tampering with awards is theft of reputation." Ada Crisp trembled but maintained composure. "I accounted for every coin. The envelopes were sealed before dawn. No one touched them after except Mr. Liddell, who insisted upon a second audit." Crossley interjected, "Odd too." Over tally. Again 3 pence extra. "Same as before." Tommy, observing, remarked softly, "Petals from the cleaner's old vase." "She gave it to Ada last winter," Inspector Purbright intervened. "It seems, in Flaxborough, confusion multiplies by the dozen. Perhaps the blue petal stands for some kindness, or just an unintended reminder of hands too eager to change what ought to remain unchanged." The congregation pressed for clarity, but Purbright gave only his usual gentle commentary. Justice, like prize money, must be distributed according to merit, not mood. Perhaps what's lost is not coins or reputation, but the trust behind them. No sooner had Mrs. Bracken reclaimed her dignity than a new disturbance erupted. The flustered cleaner tripped over a ledger box, scattering papers. Amongst the fluttering minutes were 2 torn pages of council records marked with Ada Crisp's writing, and a second, newly noticed, with Liddell's careful script. Sergeant Love, quick to act, gathered them. Purbright observed, noting both scripts muddied by flour and anxiety. Faced with public chaos and private accusation, the mayor attempted to restore order. He called for a suspension of judgment until the investigation finished, which, though met with resigned mutters, gave Purbright the opportunity he'd been seeking. The aftermath was immediate. Mr. Liddell stormed away amid whispers about accounting irregularities. Mrs. Bracken brandished her prize petunia as if armed for war. Ada Crisp clung to her ledger. The cleaner, half apologetic and half defiant, explained the trip as just nerves and a loose boxing conspiracy. With awards incomplete and the crowd dispersing, Purbright moved through the hall, observing. Near the stage, he spotted a familiar sign with a price tag, 3D less, placed deliberately in the dahlia arrangement, accompanied by flower traces, and here was the pivot, a careful fold in a page, as though someone had used it to measure out a sum. Sergeant Love stepped up, breathless. "Found something, sir. There's an extra envelope tucked under the prize table. addressed to the Garden Society. Inside, 2 shillings, a note for future efforts. Let the light fall where it may. Purbright accepted the envelope, reflecting quietly. Committee politics, muddled ledgers and pride, taxed at 3p. Now the flower show, the petunias, and the council's fortunes lay tangled together, ripe for revelation. Dusk drew in, lanterns flickered, and gossip rose again tonight. Flaxborough would not sleep easily. The incident had turned suspicion anew, casting scrutiny over every penny, petal, and promise. With the flower show's awards table still disturbed and the crowd simmering among chairs and petals, Inspector Purbright let the evening coalesce into smaller clusters. Mrs. Bracken, imperious beside her petunias, Mr. Liddle, fixated on the mishandled envelopes, Ada Crisp, hands folded around the punished ledger, and Tommy and the cleaner, quiet and somewhat relieved as order crept back. The market hall, lit in pools of lantern light, felt like a stage holding its breath for the next line. Purbright, who had watched all the comings and goings since dawn, chose now to speak softly with Ada Crisp by a side window that looked toward Crossley's shop. He asked after lost sleep, nervous accounting, and whether she suspected now what had seemed incomprehensible at the start, that every disruption since the curtain incident might stem from anxieties larger than lost coins or swapped prize tags. Ada replied, voice weary but forthright, "Inspector, the book keeps its own secrets. Perhaps I care too much. I never wanted harmony or order, only respect. I do believe now someone's tried not to steal, but to save face. Too many hands fixing too many errors." Purbright smiled, kind but elusive. When a committee's pride exceeds the value of its ledger, the arithmetic becomes secondary. Tell me who would suffer most if the Garden Society merged the flower show. Ada's eyes flicked briefly to Mr. Liddle, whose posture betrayed a hope of vindication or perhaps exoneration. The inspector left her pondering, returning to the centre of the hall as the cleaner and Tommy passed nearby carrying files. He addressed the cleaner with a mildness he reserved for those most beset. You found flour where there ought not to have been, and coin bags shuffled between rooms. Did you ever discover a note explaining these transfers? The cleaner frowned, considering. Notes, yes, almost every time. For services rendered, and let the light fall where it may. My own duster became more leather than cloth. I tried to tidy up the confusion myself, but it carried on. Mrs. Bracken, overhearing, broke in. Inspector, I say a ledger's only as honest as the hands that wield it. If Mr. Liddle's trying to tidy by numbers alone, he misses half the committee's life. Prize money ought to go with kindness. Purbright shifted his attention to Mr. Liddle, who seemed eager to offer an explanation before an accusation landed. I sought only transparency, Inspector. Ada, the cleaner, and Tommy, no one saw the ledgers as I did. There was always an error to correct, always a reason for a second tally. His words, polished by weeks of conflict, lacked conviction. I didn't alter any prizes and I didn't forge receipts. If flour stuck to me, it was by accident, not design. The town's mood filtered through the council's assembled stories and Mrs. Purton's latest declaration from the back. Somebody wants us all tidied out of existence, hovered between drama and resignation. Sergeant Love, with a collection of envelopes and tags, bent quietly over a side table, reviewing the latest evidence. Purbright stood with him a moment. Sergeant, which envelope remains unaccounted for? Love pointed, careful. The one addressed to the Garden Society. Its coins, petals, and price tag all match the others, except for the note. Let the light fall where it may. Strange phrases turn up everywhere, sir. Purbright nodded, then addressed the room gently, his tone almost conversational. Committees survive by trust, not by prizes. When reputation seems endangered, hands move faster than sense, and truth may be tidied away. Most errors here were covered with good intent, but good intent often tangles the knot. His words, at first met by silence, sent small waves among the listeners. Mr. Liddell's defensive certainty faltered. Mrs. Bracken retreated to the dahlia display with quiet mutterings. Ada, eyes red, sat straighter at the ledger's edge. Seeing hesitation, Purbright acted. He took the stage, ledger in hand, and turned to Mr. Liddell. "Tell me, sir, what would you have done if you discovered minor errors, misplaced coins, mismatched tags, and incomplete records, and feared for the committee's future?" Mr. Liddell looked first indignant, then wilting. "I would have corrected them, quietly, without fuss, but the committee always has so much pride, so much reluctance. I worried the Garden Society would take charge and we'd lose everything, so I fixed what I could." Purbright's gaze, never unkind, always thorough, shifted to the cleaner. "And you who tidied after us all, did you think the dust would sweep out more than pence?" She smiled, small and sad. "I only tried to put things right. When I saw the flour and the files scattered, I felt the committee's worry. Sometimes cleaning feels like covering up." The market hall held its collective breath as Purbright turned to the assembly, issuing his quiet test. If an honest accounting were offered tonight, who could swear no error, no correction, and no impulse to tidy more than was strictly permitted? He looked to Ada, to Bracken, to Liddell, to the cleaner, and to the silent faces at the walls. One by one, each gave the faintest shrug or small nod, the admission habitual in Flaxborough, not guilt, but participation. Not theft, but untidy hope. Mrs. Purton, unable to contain herself, declared, "You see, Inspector, even flowers need a good shake now and then." Purbright returned her dry smile. "Quite so. But if the roots are strong, the petals recover. I suspect tomorrow we'll find clarity when the dust literally and metaphorically settles. For tonight, keep hands out of the ledger and let no one change the prize tags." Dusk found Flaxborough not reconciled, but suspended in anticipation, the inspector's measured challenge reverberating through committee, ledger, and conscience alike. Morning in Flaxborough broke clear and uncannily bright, as if even the sky felt obliged to freshen up after the week's accumulating dust. In Market Hall, the committee files nested quietly on Ada Crisp's desk. The ledger, closed and central, presided over the aftermath. Not a single prize tag dangled out of place, and the flour had vanished from every threshold, save for the faintest ghost on the kitchen door, left, perhaps, as a reminder that even the most thorough cleaning leaves some trace. Inspector Purbright, composed as ever, gathered the committee and their audience. Mrs. Bracken stood resolute beside her restored dahlia tableau. Mr. Liddell hovered, stiff but attentive. Ada Crisp's exhaustion had settled into a kind of peaceful resolve. Sergeant Love and the cleaner appeared equally relieved, though the former still clutched his notebook as if more secrets might erupt. "Thank you for your patience," Purbright began in his quiet, steady voice, "and for permitting me to make sense of this most tangled tally." His gaze rested in turn on each committee member. What troubled Flaxborough was not theft, nor even deliberate sabotage, but a cascade of good intentions, each, in its way, more disruptive than malice. He turned to Ada. "Your care for the ledger became a fortress, unable to admit fault. Small errors, /coins miscounted, and prize tags swapped were corrected by others so that you might be spared embarrassment. But those corrections, silent and often clumsy, sowed confusion rather than clarity. To Mrs. Bracken, you judged blooms and committees alike, and when errors surfaced, you corrected quietly, trusting that a generous hand might heal a bruised reputation. You instructed the cleaner to mend prize tags, hoping to salvage public pride. Now to Mr. Little, whose nervousness barely twitched. In hope of preserving the committee's independence, you undertook late-night audits, moved coins, opened envelopes not marked for you, and added services rendered notes so suspicious that they became more damaging than open accusation. You feared a merger with the Garden Society would erase the tradition and tried by managing accounts almost to rigor mortis do show order, not disorder. He paused for the cleaner, whose hands now rested steady in her lap. Duty led you to tidy not only dust, but also doubts, wrapping files in your cloth and delivering parcels mistimed and mislabeled. None of you acted from greed, but all from anxiety. In Flaxborough, it seems, a tidy ledger can cause far more scandal than empty coffers. The gathered townsfolk absorbed these findings quietly. Purbright allowed himself the smallest of smiles. The curtain lever was tampered with so the committee's carefully composed order might be displayed before suspicion took hold. When Flower marked your tracks and changed your routines, you each tried to sweep away traces but only succeeded in scattering more questions. Sergeant Love at last interjected. "So no theft, sir? Only good intentions running wild?" Purbright nodded. "Quite so. When reputations are at stake, minor corrections multiply. Each act to fix becomes an act to conceal. Every price tag, every flower petal and stray shilling became evidence not of fraud but of the desperate hope to avert shame." He picked up the ledger, leafing through, now serene. This record, like Flaxborough itself, is patched by many hands. Forensic drama is unnecessary here. Quiet confession suffices. The cleaner feared for her job, Ada Crisp for discipline, Mrs. Bracken for tradition, Mr. Little for autonomy, and Tommy for familial peace. Even the mayor, who preferred speeches to arithmetic, feared losing face as custodian of order. The day's gossip, poised to strike, found itself deprived of meat. Mrs. Purton was overheard announcing, "Let that be a lesson." The more you tidy, the bigger your mess, according to Mr. Jesson, who replied, "Flowers will have their muddle, just as ledgers will have their muddle. It's our job to water both." As files were straightened, coins recounted, and accusations shelved, a gentle restoration entered Flaxborough's Market Hall. Committees merged, meetings resumed, and even Mrs. Bracken tolerated the new prize envelope system, provided she could check it against Petunia Bloom. Ada Crisp smiled, not with triumph, but relief. Inspector Purbright lingered a moment longer, watching as the townsfolk spun new tales for the week ahead, the tidiest hall, the happiest committee, and the best pie ever, judged by the mayor, who swore off speeches for a season. A little irony, a little humility, and a great deal of understated wit restored order far more decisively than any audit could. By late afternoon, Flaxborough returned to its old rhythm, less fraught, more forgiving. The committee had learned, after all, that a tidy ledger means little if reputations cannot be trusted to balance their own books.